My name is Philip Mulford. Thank you for being here this evening. I'm here to moderate the candidate forums. We have two of them for you tonight. The first is going to be for the Virginia House of Delegates for the 18th District, and we're going to go until 8 o'clock with that. And then we'll switch, and we'll be talking to candidates for the Board of Supervisors, or there may only be one of the candidates here, but we will find out what that's going to be like when we get to that. But we're going to start off with the candidates two for the 18th District, and you can see sitting in front of you, Ms. Laura Galante and Mr. Michael Webert. And I just asked him to pronounce his name properly, and I just blew it. Webert, thank you. So we'll get to them shortly. I want to go over the process, how it's going to work. But first I want to thank our sponsors for tonight, which include the Fauquier Chamber of Commerce, the Fauquier Farm Bureau, Fauquier County Bar Association, Fauquier Now, Fauquier Times, and Fauquier Channel 1. The panelists for tonight, some of them are associated with those entities. On my far right, Lawrence Emerson, editor of Fauquier Now, and then Catherine Nelson, publisher of the Fauquier Times, and Leland Schwartz with Fauquier Channel 1. So they'll be asking the questions. The format for the evening is going to be the candidates will have 3 minutes for opening remarks. Then we're going to move to question and answers. Initially, the panelists will be asking the questions that they have pre-prepared. But you all are welcome to participate in that by writing out a question on a card. There are volunteers around with cards. If you have a question you'd like to be asked, please write it down, pass it back to one of the volunteers. They'll pass them up to the panelists. There's no guarantee that your question will be asked exactly as it's written. It may be assimilated into similar questions, or it may just not have time to get to it. I apologize for that in advance, but the panelists will do the best they can to get to as many questions as possible. So the candidates will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. There is no, if you've been here or to prior forums, you've maybe used to seeing lights in front of you. We've changed that. So the candidates will not be speaking to lights. They'll be speaking to the question, hopefully, and we'll move on with even more questions than we would otherwise. And then at the end, the candidates will have 2 minutes for their closing remarks. So tonight, by prior draw, we have arranged for the candidate's order of opening and closing remarks. And Mr. Webert will have the opening and closing to go first, and Ms. Galante will go second for the opening and the closing. So without further ado, let us proceed. Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. You are welcome to applaud after the opening remarks and after the closing remarks. During the question and answer, I would ask you to refrain from any type of response to the candidate's comments so we can move through this process of question and answer as much as possible and get as many questions answered as possible. But with that, let's move to the opening remarks. Mr. Webert, please.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are we tonight? Good. First, let me thank our gracious hosts and everyone involved in putting this together. Thank you to the volunteers that helped put all this together. First, let me share a little bit about me. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Rebecca. We have 2 beautiful children. Both, unfortunately, take after me because they're both boys. And our house is filled with joy and a whole lot of chaos. My oldest son is in the public school system and goes to Claude Thompson, just up the road. And I farm for a living. I run a family farming operation. Between owned and rented land, we farm about 2,200 acres. I've got 2 full-time employees, well, 3, 2.5, who have been with me for more than a decade. They have been loyal employees. We grow corn, which is used and sold to the poultry industry. And I also ship it down to Culpeper Co-op for special cattle feed for me. I grow wheat, which is normally sold to Ardent Mills. Ardent Mills is a mill in Culpeper. They spent $26 million revamping their system so that they can make flour. And so next time you pull into Chick-fil-A, you're welcome, because a lot of my wheat ends up being made into that flour. We grow soybeans, which are sold on the internationally, and then we raise Angus and Hereford cattle. We sell bulls to local producers, as well as replacement females, and we also sell meat/beef, and pretty soon you'll be able to do it online. We're going to be selling a little bit of products online. Now I'd like to talk about what we've been able to accomplish in the House of Delegates, and I'll just talk about the most recent. First and foremost, We passed the largest regulatory reform package the Commonwealth has ever seen. This is cited as a primary reason for the Commonwealth going up from 7 to the #1 state to do business, our regulatory atmosphere. 2 years ago, it was 7 to 4, citing that legislation. In conjunction with cutting red tape, we have given teacher pay raises. This year we gave a 5% teacher pay raise without raising your taxes, and I have constantly fought to increase funding for our schools since my son is in the public school system. Second, we passed HB 1609, which has revitalized the horse industry. I don't know about you, but in Fauquier County we have a lot of horses. This legislation brought $250 million in investment, all without state subsidies. Third, we worked with the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of Environmental Quality to pass common sense conservation legislation. What we did was we created low interest loans and grants for agricultural producers to implement agricultural best management practices. Now, I've implemented these practices in my own farming operation, and they are the taxpayer's biggest bang for the buck. And so this legislation is a way for agricultural producers to do their share in cleaning up the bay. Those are just a couple of the things that we've been able to accomplish over the last few years. I want to thank everyone for being here, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webert. Ms. Galante, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. Thank you to our hosts, and what a nice packed crowd here in Marshall. Nothing like an off-year election to draw attention to what are incredibly important elections, our state elections this November. I grew up in 4-H in Fairfax County, 20-some miles from right here. And when you're growing up in Fairfax County as a 4-H'er, you come out here quite a bit. This is where it was competitive to show sheep, judge livestock, and judge meat. I was proud to judge on Virginia's behalf at the National Livestock Judging Competition in 2000. But then 9/11 happened. And it made me, like so many of us, look at what service to our country meant and how we best contributed. And I went to the University of Virginia, studied national security and foreign affairs, and then went into our intelligence community, the Defense Intelligence Agency. And at the Department of Defense, I focused on how we protect America from our adversaries in cyberspace. After years at the Department of Defense, I was frustrated that the government wasn't taking this threat as seriously as we saw the threat becoming. So I went to the private sector, and I was part of one of the teams that built out the original analysis about how the Chinese military was stealing America's hard-won trade secrets and intellectual property theft. And I built out my team to 90 intelligence analysts at a public company where I had a profit and loss line that was part of my business acumen that I built at the company. We went on to continue to expose what nation states were doing to American companies and to our democracy. So much of what I realized as I led those exposures of our intellectual property theft and what adversaries were doing to America was that this was about trust. It was how our adversaries exploited us. And I looked around and I said, how do we rebuild trust in this country? How do we change our politics so this doesn't feel like a screaming match? How do we get things done again? And I believe the best way to do that is locally, particularly at the state level. And that's why I threw my hat in the ring to run for this race. I think we rebuild trust right here around us by taking on the issues that are right here in the 18th district that have been neglected for years. The first is this. I will focus on growing jobs and building our workforce in a way that makes sure that people don't just have the singular route to college. Good paying jobs come in a lot of forms, and we have so many openings in the technical and trades. That's where I want to make sure we fill in our workforce gaps that are all across the Commonwealth. The next piece is making sure that our community is as strong as the spirit that we have in this room. That means making sure healthcare is affordable and accessible. The highest premiums in the country are right near us in Charlottesville. And the next piece is making sure that our public school systems, of which I am a product of the Virginia public school system from elementary through university, are as strong as the world-class education as our students will need. That means funding and paying our teachers appropriately. Third, internet. We need to make sure that our students and our businesses have the tools to compete in a global economy and the education to go with it, and that means having good broadband access. And from a tech nerd like myself, you will see me digging in on this deeply in Richmond. For far too long, this has been passed to the county level. We have a real opportunity at this moment. And what you will see in my approach, in my campaign, and tonight, is one that doesn't start with a D or an R next to it. I think ideas come in so many formats, and rarely do they have a political name ahead of them. And I think people are a lot like that too. I've been reaching out to Democrats, Republicans, independents, people who don't vote throughout this
Ms.
campaign.
Galante,
And
I'm sorry, I have to, your 3 minutes are up.
Thank you.
All right, now I'm turning to questions and answers from the panelists. And Mr. Schwartz, you can start us off.
Could you both please tell us how you feel about the impeachment inquiry of the president?
Ms. Galante?
Well, isn't that the question of the hour, right? Here's the thing. Mr. Webert and I are up here to represent ourselves in the House of Delegates, not in Congress. And the last time I checked the Constitution, your state delegate does not have a role in that question. And that's why I think it's incredibly important that we stay laser focused on where we can make progress in this country. And I think it's in the State House. I think when you go with smart ideas and you've listened to people in your district, you can take on real change in Richmond in a session there. And that's the approach that I will have. I am focused on how we make sure that common sense solutions and practical measures get done in Richmond. And that's where I will keep my campaign, and that's where I will govern from. Thank you.
Mr. Webert?
Well, that would be an excellent question for Denver Riggle. Is who it would be. As my opponent mentioned, we are focused on Virginia State, the state of the Commonwealth of Virginia, as well as our local issues. We've taken those. We've taken them to Richmond, and we've passed legislation. We've passed legislation for Fauquier County. We passed green development zones that the county asked for. We've worked to protect the county's interests when it comes to expanding broadband because, Rappahannock County is a lot different than the southern end of Fauquier. And localities need to have a say in how we expand broadband. Not only that, but we've looked at agricultural issues when it comes to agritourism, when it comes to other issues, when it comes to conservation easements. I've strived to protect those, even when the Democrat governors want to cut those programs. Because, I hate to say it, I'm a farmer. Open space is a good thing for us. So, I'll be sure to ask Denver next time I see him about what he thinks about the impeachment process. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Welcome. Both of you have emphasized your rural roots. What do you think are the biggest threats to farmers, and what steps would you take to mitigate?
Mr. Webert?
I get to go first. That's actually a loaded question because there are so many different answers. If you look at the agricultural industry across the spectrum, particularly in Fauquier County, you have a large amount of commodity farmers, and that means all the cattle that you see. I sit on the Fauquier Livestock Exchange Board, and one of the things that we're seeing is fewer and fewer landowners are allowing guys like me to rent land. So we need to continue to educate landowners in regards to how commodity agriculture is done. We need to support the small guys or the niche farmers. So for instance, when you talk to, say, Whiffletree Farm, Jesse Strait, he's got his eggs, he's got his chickens and all of that. We helped him back in the day. The Department of Health was saying that he couldn't sell his eggs to a restaurant. And we said that you could, and we called Richmond and we got them to be able to do that. We worked on some of those processes. We need to continue to do that. We also need to continue to fund and increase the amount of broadband that we've done. When I started, we were at 0. Now we're at 19 million. We need to continue to do that because a lot of farmers, like Mariah Farms and Virginia Beef, all their equipment runs on satellite and GPS. And we need to continue to get more efficient.
Ms. Galante?
I see agriculture in this county in 2 ways. First is the production agriculture, which makes up a big sector of our farm income here, right? Corn, soy, cow rotation. And the main market in Virginia overseas is China. And that has really taken a toll on our farms here. I see it as an important state issue to diversify our larger global markets and trading partners so that we're not dependent on China as the main market for our production producers. The second type of agriculture is the smaller local farming that is feeding some of our local restaurants and is finding ways to crack that nut of selling directly to consumers, where the value is much higher for those smaller farms. Here's what we need. We need to be able to use the state spending that's already going into the budget, take school lunches, for example, and use some of that state spending in a way that effectively expands the market and makes it more predictable for the whiffletree farms of the world. So here's an example. In our procurement process for state lunches, for school lunches, we could have a cutout that includes a percentage that goes to local farms. Kids in Rappahannock can eat Rappahannock apples. Kids out of Fauquier could eat Fauquier beef. This is easy. It's not raising taxes. It's already using our tax dollars at work. It's creative solutions like that that can really drive and power this local ag market that I think Fauquier is so well poised to drive. We already have those innovative practices. We're close to the markets. Let's give the predictability of good year-round markets to these farms. Third, extension service.
Ms. Galante, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off.
Thank you.
Next question.
Okay, excuse me. Could both of you please explain your positions on potential firearms regulations in Virginia to include universal background checks, red flag laws, and potentially an assault weapons ban? Ms. Galante, you get the question first.
Thank you. I support the Second Amendment, and I also don't like that so many people, including myself, send our kids to school and are worried about the danger that they're in during the day. Here's what I support. Common sense approaches, including background checks, especially for internet sales. I want to make sure that on the preschool checklist in Virginia, that we can ask whether the firearms at that preschool, that home, are secured. I want to make sure that we have school security officers. I'm glad in Fauquier that a lot of them have been trained by Sheriff Mosier. That gives me the ability to sleep at night. We need common sense measures. And we need a legislator who will listen to the common sense safety measures that come in front of them. What you have in Mr. Webert is someone who sits on the Public Safety and Militia Subcommittee in Richmond. Bills come in front of him and they go to die before they get a good hearing, before they can ever even reach the floor. And back in July, a special session of the General Assembly was called to address these common sense safety measures, and it was shut down before bills could even be discussed. If there's one core job of a delegate, it's to listen to what comes in front of you, and that's what you were going to be.
Ms. Galante, could you please address the three questions or subparts of that question: universal background checks, red flag laws, and an assault weapons ban?
I support universal background checks, as I mentioned. Red flag laws are proposed by President Trump's own School Safety Commission, and I support them as well. They need good due process checks, and that's why a judge is involved. The next piece?
Assault weapons ban.
I think we need to take a real look at not just the form or the aesthetics of a weapon, but what the function is. And you'll see in me someone who wants to dig into the details, who understands that the Second Amendment, your right to self-defense, is important, but we also need to take our job as guardians of public safety importantly as well. And I will take that approach as I evaluate the proposals that would come up around assault weapons.
So fundamentally, you're unwilling to tell us whether or not you think citizens should have the right to buy military-grade rifles.
I think that there's been a lot of confusion about what an assault weapon is, about what a military-grade weapon is. I would like to see the actual proposal that comes up with the details, and I would talk to a variety of constituencies to understand what the exact function is that's proposed in that bill.
Thank you. Mr. Webber?
Well, first of all, current law states that if you purchase a firearm over the internet, it has to be shipped to an FFL where you undergo a background check. Let's talk about background checks. In 2010, 72,000 people were denied background checks. How many were prosecuted? 30. If we actually prosecuted many of the 72,000, I'm sure we could remove many people who would otherwise use firearms illegally. Second, when it comes to red flag laws. When we were in subcommittee, we had a bill, a red flag bill, and it was a very well thought out bill with a judge, a single person, and the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, who would determine whether those firearms were removed. The Commonwealth's Attorneys Association stood up and said that they had major issues with due process in that bill. And every citizen in this country is afforded due process so that we don't put innocent people in jail. If you are willing to erode due process, the criminal justice reform that everybody screams of, we're going to need a lot more of it. So the bill that came before us, while it was well thought out, the very people that were going to administer the law had problems with it. So therefore it went down. Now, when it comes to an assault weapons ban, a semi-automatic firearm is the most commonly owned firearm in the country. Okay? The proposed legislation that came before us during session, if I had voted for it, my hunting rifle would be illegal. Now, when it comes to the Second Amendment and our ability to defend ourselves as we see fit, there's a reason we have an amendment in the Constitution for that. And there's an amendment in the Virginia Constitution for that. So, I hope that answered those three questions.
Sort of. I'm still struggling, like many citizens. I wonder, as an average citizen, how we reconcile the ability of someone with ill intent to legally buy one of these, what are commonly referred to, such as an AR-15, as a military-grade weapon. What are we going to do? We had Virginia Beach, we had Virginia Tech. It's become, and nothing seems to be. We're all struggling to try to figure this out. So what should we do? Well, you spoke of specific bills that didn't meet certain tests. Okay, those bills didn't work. What might work to improve the confidence of citizens of the Commonwealth that we're doing everything we can to protect innocent, unarmed citizens, perhaps?
So when it comes to protecting our schools, we've worked consistently. Previous delegates, Scott Lingenfelter and I, worked on a piece of legislation which Sheriff Bob Mosier has implemented and put SROs in every single school, and the county has very graciously funded some of that. When it comes to background checks, again, how many people were denied and were not prosecuted?
When you say denied, you mean denied?
Yeah, they might have
denied the ability. You said denied background checks.
Yeah, so if you fill out a background check, there is a button on there, or there's a box on there that says, "Are you a felon?"
Okay.
If you check on that box, you're a felon trying to purchase a firearm. Now, when it comes to universal background checks, the question is, if one criminal is selling another criminal a firearm, who does the background check?
Ms. Galante, would you like to follow up with that?
I would. We wear seatbelts even though there are car crashes that can't prevent your death, right? We need basic public safety measures, and my opponent's unwillingness to commit to background checks is, I think, a true inability to see how important this issue is. We also have someone here who has opposed the common sense safety measures, again, like this daycare checklist, right? Asking whether a gun is properly secured at a daycare. That's the extent to which my opponent has opposed these reforms. We need to look into how we take these basic public safety measures so that we have an assurance, like our questioner has asked, that the government is looking out for public safety in addition to your right to self-defense. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you have to give Mr. Webert an opportunity.
Well, just real quick, in regards to the preschool bill, the piece of legislation was carried by Patrick Hope, Delegate Hope, and we reworded the bill because the bill we felt was restrictive that an off-duty police officer wanted to come pick up his child, he was not allowed to wear his firearm. So we reworded it, and the governor's office refused to negotiate. The problem with the common sense background checks or the common sense gun legislation is it's their way or the highway, and we are not allowed to negotiate on that, and we did. And the governor killed the bill.
Could you tell us if you feel climate change is a threat?
Ms. Galante, I'm sorry, Mr. Webert?
Yeah. All right. Where am I? So, no. Climate change is a challenge, is it not? Climate change has been around for 30 years. Climate change has been around since Al Gore was running. It's a challenge. It's a challenge we all face, but it's a challenge that we also need to look at when it comes to common sense environmental legislation. Okay? When you're looking at sea level rise, when you're looking at some of the other things that are coming, or are here, or whatever, you've got to look at, so for instance, I've been attacked on RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Okay? That piece of legislation, or that fit in the bill, was actually a poorly negotiated piece. If we're going to enter in it, the Commonwealth of Virginia does not need to be a net payer. We have a wide swath of the Commonwealth of Virginia that we can utilize against New York, New Jersey, and keep our electric bills low. Not only that, but when we deal with our electric, like Dominion, or APCO, or Rappahannock Electric, we've had legislation that makes solar, makes green energy a priority. That was passed in 2017. So we are addressing it. But the issue is you do not want to address it in a way that hurts the poor. Folks in Arlington and McLean, many could probably afford a higher electric bill. Folks in downtown Richmond and rural parts of Appalachia can't. So we need to ensure that the greatest thing that we can do, particularly when it comes to energy, is weatherization and continue to incentivize these other forms. But we also have to be careful that we don't end up...
I'm sorry.
I apologize.
That's okay. You're gonna need to move on.
I need points.
Ms. Galante, please.
Addressing climate is one of the key challenges of our time. We're living through this crisis at a personal level, at an industry level, and at the peril of future generations. We have to get serious about it at the federal level, the state issue, locally. That's not political, it's just the facts. Here's what I would do. I would make sure that companies that are going through a chemical spill have to report what happened on time, unlike my opponent, who sponsored bills, or who voted for bills that allowed those spills to continue without reporting. I would vote to make sure that we are part of regional greenhouse gas initiatives and efforts that are important market-based solutions that both create jobs and work on taking our carbon emissions down. I don't see this as a trade-off between jobs and our planet. I see this as one singular challenge where we can benefit on a variety of levels. Green jobs is where the growth is in this country. It is where we are having an explosion of people in technology sector, in the solar sector, who are focused on this. We also have a company, Dominion, which is our state monopoly, regulated by the General Assembly. And that oversight is compromised when our legislators, like my opponent, take thousands of dollars from Dominion year after year. It makes appropriate oversight in a renewable portfolio a joke. We need to get serious about this. This isn't one-off weatherization steps. This is an important full-scale challenge that we need to take on for both our own environmental sake and for jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Galante. Thank you very much. Next question.
Mr. Weber, would you support or oppose Delegate Kathy Cham's late-term abortion if refiled in the next session?
I would oppose.
Ms. Galante.
The bill that came forward on this issue would change existing law and take down the standard that was required for an abortion that would happen in the late term of a pregnancy, something that is very rarely and has not happened in the Commonwealth for years. I don't think we need to change that existing law. I do think that when people hear this issue, and I heard a little from people out in the audience when it came up, that they rarely have good news around it. Well, I bring you a little bit of good news on this issue. This week, A study came out from the leading bipartisan group on birth and women's health, and they said that Virginia's abortion rate has decreased by 42% from 2011 to 2017. That's twice the national average. That's a good thing, no matter how you think about this issue. And what they attribute that to is better access to contraceptives. And I think that is a place, plus education, where we can make real strides in the Commonwealth at the state level, and something that my opponent has not supported when he denied healthcare plans needing to require contraceptive access, STD testing, and help for breastfeeding mothers. We need to take seriously these important healthcare issues that women and families face every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariane. Mr. Webert, is that the extent of your response to that question?
Well, I would oppose the piece of legislation. I mean, quite frankly, the piece of legislation that was put before us would have taken away some of the restrictions. Again, if, as my opponent points out, abortions are rare, why do we need to change the law? I oppose it.
Thank you.
Okay, could you explain your position or positions on the potential decriminalization and/or legalization of marijuana? Ms. Galante, you're first.
I think steps towards decriminalization are common sense, and they also start to alleviate the burden on the justice system, which takes on an incredible caseload around marijuana. So I think it's an important efficiency standpoint from the judicial branch, and something that a lot of law enforcement officers have been looking for and wanting for years. I think that's important. When it comes to medical marijuana, I think that there are good pieces to this, especially when it comes to solving the opioid crisis. How you can control pain and manage your pain. I've talked to several veterans who said it really helps me to be able to access CBD oils and other organic and natural ways to cope with my pain, and keeps me from having to have opioid prescriptions. So I think that's an important part of the wide set of proposals that we need to look at as we face the opioid crisis as well.
So you didn't address potential recreational use. Should we assume you're opposed to that?
I do not support recreational legalization, and I'm more focused on how we make sure that medical marijuana is an important way for dealing with the pain crisis that we have.
Thank you. Mr. Webert.
I too am opposed to recreational use. I'm also for medical marijuana. Because then it is prescribed by a doctor, very much like anything else. Hence the reason marijuana is still a scheduled drug. I've also voted to decriminalize CBD oil and numerous other things that a medical doctor can prescribe. For instance, CBD oil is very helpful because an employee of mine has a family member that suffers from anxiety, etc. And rather than putting her on whatever drugs that they wanted to put her on, they asked the question. They said, can we try CBD oil? And the pediatrician said, yes, you can try it. And it works. When it comes to recreational marijuana, there is a number of policy issues that occur in California, Washington, Colorado. And what we've found is that they have created factories that basically, it's butane hash oil or whatever it's called. And basically what they do is they cook down the marijuana and come up with a compound that's 80% more THC. And while that's not as dangerous, it's the actual making of that product. And California's cracking down on these things because they're blowing up like meth labs. So you've got to be careful on some of the unintended consequences that occur.
Next question.
Do you see any state-level financial monitoring legislation coming out of the General Assembly regarding the investigation in Warren County?
Mr. Webert?
Say that again. You're talking about Warren County, the investigation? Yes.
Picture some
Oh, absolutely.
financial
I mean,
oversight.
so essentially what has happened is that the Warren County Board of Supervisors, they were arraigned for malfeasance, the misdemeanor. So basically what the grand jury is saying is that they did not do their jobs according to the law. They were lax in their oversight of the EDA. It was discovered. And people were prosecuted. The sheriff took his own life. The good news is, I feel, that there are a couple of candidates running for supervisor, Robert Hutman and Dolores Oates particularly, that are willing to clean house. And Robert Hutman himself, I brought him here. Our Board of Supervisors and our economic development person, Miles Friedman, and agricultural Ray Pickering have done an excellent job. And so I said, hey, let's bring you over here, show you how it's done right, how Board of Supervisors is supposed to oversee that. And I believe that if those folks are elected, that they will do that. They will clean house, reorganize the county government so that they have a greater oversight, as well as let go of a lot of the unnecessary buildings, et cetera, that have been incurred. And the justice system is going to follow through. I mean, they've been arraigned, and we'll see what happens from there.
Ms. Galante?
Let me be clear about what's happened. If you haven't checked the Washington Post front page, you may have missed this story. $21 million was embezzled from the Economic Development Agency in Warren County, and the people involved span the heads of the Economic Development Agency, along with now indicting every one of the current supervisors in Warren County. This is a true failure of both oversight, of people's basic ability to deliver on their promises, and an incredibly criminal act that is now taking place at the peril of people in Front Royal who bought into the plan that was proposed to them. Economic development agencies are sort of a rare bird. Here's how it works. The state General Assembly gives counties the authority to set up an economic development agency. But then they pretty much wash their hands clean of any responsibility or oversight role, like our question, on how that economic development agency can be reviewed for possible malfeasance, like in the case that was going on for years in Warren County. I will support measures to have an oversight or auditing role for how economic development agencies operate so that best practices can be followed and so that we don't have another Warren County where embezzlement is multi-million dollars and the people of Front Royal and Warren County have been sold short on what could have been a true vision for transformation in that county and that town instead of a criminal enterprise that's been happening just 25 miles from us here. Thank you.
Next question.
Mr. Weber, although $50 million was originally proposed to address the lack of broadband accessibility, only $19 million was approved. What's the next step to make a dent in the lack of broadband in rural areas? Is it the state's responsibility to help solve the problem?
Oh, it is certainly the state's ability, or part of the state's responsibility to help solve the problem. That's why we have ADDI. That's why we have the grant system. However, when it comes to the ability to figure out what is the best method of delivery for that last mile, the county supervisors, the elected officials of that county are certainly be part of that. And that's why it's set up the way it was. The way the governor had set up not only $50 million, but a bunch of other spending, was he was taking advantage of the tax cuts that were coming and raising taxes. We changed our tax code so that we were able to give a refund this year, plus add more broadband funding for grants so that when the localities decide they want to, they can help provide the extra mile. Right now, as we sit here today, Rappahannock Electric is laying down dark fiber. They want to partner with localities to help provide that last mile, and that's what that grant funding is for. Also, this last year, we authorized Dominion Electric to be able to lay down their own fiber and have people tap onto it. So while this backbone is being laid, the Virginia, the VATI can then provide those grants. But the localities need to help, because whether it's a cell tower or whether it's actual running fiber, et cetera, it's those types of partnerships and working together that we're able to solve this problem.
Ms. Galante?
For someone who sees broadband as importantly as I do, whether it's for agriculture application, for kids getting their homework done and not having to sit in this very parking lot, or for small businesses, which are 85% of our county, needing to be able to have a simple conference call from home, right? These are the types of issues on why broadband is important, and I think my opponent agrees with the importance of it. But here's where I differ. Richmond has been missing a key role here. It's pressure on Comcast. That last mile isn't simply something you can push down to supervisors across the Commonwealth. It's something where you need to take on Comcast, who has said that areas like ours are undesirable and unprofitable. Fine. But then when record profits are happening in Arlington, Fairfax County, and the denser parts of the state, it needs to be addressed so that areas like this can actually get hooked up. It's not just pressure on Comcast though. It's also making sure that we prioritize the actual fiber optic cable in Richmond instead of saying any technology will do. I won't ask you, because you can't raise your hands, but if you're on satellite, you're probably not real happy. Well, that counts in Richmond for coverage, and that's not fair. We need to stop taking answers that just say, municipalities, localities, go deal with it yourself. Said at a conference just the other day, every panel was run by Comcast. Every person in the audience was a supervisor who put up their hands and said, I'm just not sure what else I can do except apply for a grant. We need people who know what they're doing on getting broadband finished and are willing to take on the cable companies instead of take thousands of dollars from them. And that's the approach that I'm going to have in Richmond. It's common sense, it's technology focused, and it puts pressure on Comcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
For decades, local officials have made the case without success that Fauquier County gets the shaft when it comes to state school funding because of the complex composite index, which among other things penalizes Fauquier for its liberal application of land use valuation. In other words, property gets considered at market value versus its actual use value when the state determines how much money the locality gets. Is that a problem that can get solved? And if so, how does one solve it? Is it a zero-sum game where if Fauquier gains funds, somebody else loses funds? Ms. Galante, I believe it's your turn to go first.
I'm glad this question hones in on the composite index, the formula that determines state and county funding levels. Fauquier does get a very high rating on the composite index, which means lower state funding, and we need a good look at how that changes. A big piece of this is addressing agricultural counties like us and making sure that the value in our open space, in our agricultural land, and in our conservation land is taken into account in that funding formula. We have an important public good that we're putting forth in the Commonwealth by having this land rural and by having this land farmed. Now, I think a key part of that composite index change will allow for better pay for our teachers, which needs to be the focus here. Prince William County, with their composite index, gets about $2,000 more per pupil. Now, that's not working for us. So we need to focus on this. It needs to be looked at, and we need to make sure that we're paying our teachers so we're not losing them next door.
Well, everybody wants to look at it, but how do you do it?
I think you start unpacking the formula. It's based on 3 factors: retail sales, income tax, and then land value. We need to look at that land value piece. And right now that formula is wrapped up in a state study, and it's looked at on how we take agricultural land into account. Do we put it at development value, thinking that houses might be built there and valuing it there, or do we go and value it at its true use value? I'm a proponent of looking back at its use value. So I'd like to unpack that 3rd factor around property use and cost and make sure that we're not shortchanging the smaller school systems and rural school systems like ours.
Mr. Webert, you've been, I suspect, wrestling with this for a while, and you probably hear from local officials every year who are unhappy and frequently critical of our local delegation. What have you done?
Well, every single year, as Elizabeth Delegate Guzman noted last forum, as she was a co-patron on my piece of legislation, we put together a study. The problem is, when you know the answer to the question, which is that our land use valuation actually hurts our ability to fund our schools from the state. Fauquier is a 0.59, Rappahannock is a 0.79. Every year I go down to Richmond and I fight for little old Rappahannock. I love Rappahannock. We've gotten them 75,000 here, 50,000 here. They partner with Madison to be able to provide programs, etc. So I've gone down. The problem is when you know the answer to the question, nobody wants to ask the question because Loudoun County has a lot of influence. How many delegates and senators represent Loudoun County? A lot. How many delegates and senators represent Fairfax County? A lot. Prince William? A lot. So Prince William and Loudoun County is one of the richest counties in the nation, and they actually pay less per pupil than we do. And part of it is because of that. And I have gone down, tried to form, I actually got my piece of legislation to full committee, and then it was not heard. And that's because they know the answer to the question. It's if we could take land use and assign it, or conservation easements, etc., we would actually see more state funding and our composite index would go down. We've made exceptions. Highland County, Rappahannock used to be an exception, and then they dropped below 0.8. So I've seen a little bit of result for Rapp. I've seen, Fauquier got $2.39 million more this year than they did last year, and we'll continue to fight for money for our schools because, quite frankly, we have a great school system. And as I told Dr. Jeck and all the teachers that came into my office, I was for providing a 5% teacher pay raise, but I wasn't willing to raise taxes to do it, and we managed to figure out a way.
Thank you, Mr. Webert. Next question is going to start with Mr. Webert.
Can you think of any legislation that would attack the logging truck transport problem on Route 17 here?
So the problem that you have with the logging trucks is logs don't weigh very much. So they're never really overweight because there's actually a lot of air between the logs. They come through Marshall, they come through Atoka. There's two things that we can do, not necessarily on 17. 17 has its own issues that we need to work on. First of all, we need to basically, I would like to try and put up like we have on the northern side of 17, the electric speed limit signs, etc. But if you come through Marshall, if you come through Rectortown, I'd like to make some of those roads no throughways. And we were able to accomplish this in Rappahannock County on Bend the New Road. That road is very, very narrow, it's unsafe, and if we can get the citizens together to coalesce and do that, we can approach VDOT and try and make some of these roads so that the ability there's no throughway, so that they can't, go from Madison all the way up to West Virginia.
Ms. Galante?
I'd like to look at ways to slow 17. When you talk to people who are heavily affected, who live on 17, that's one of their key issues. And I'd like to see if there could be a dual posted, as we have across the state, a different speed limit for truck versus passenger traffic. So I'd be willing to look at proposals that address this issue. There's more than a few people who have said, my death will come when I pull out of my driveway onto 17. So this is very real, and it is a safety hazard. We need to look at how to handle this. I do want to reserve some time to come back to education though, because what you heard is that someone who's been in the majority for 4 terms has not been able to move on state funding, on county funding for our schools. We need someone who can advocate for us, who can build coalitions, not just say there are a lot of legislators in Prince William and Loudoun. We need a real advocate who can understand this issue, work within their party and outside of it to get things done. And as much as education funding seems to be part of my opponent's claims, I do see that he's supported charter schools, he's supported vouchers, and putting tax dollars towards the Virginia Virtual School, all things that take away from the 95% of Virginia children that go to public school. Thank you.
Mr. Webert, would you like to respond?
Yes. First of all, 6 out of 8 years I've been in the General Assembly, we've given teacher raises. Second, when it comes to charter schools, you have schools in Petersburg, Virginia that have generations of people that have gone to a non-accredited school. Not every school system is like Fauquier County. Not everybody's like many of the people here who have the ability to choose where their kids go to school. We have a lot of private schools. We have a lot of great education here in Fauquier County. Petersburg, Virginia does not. We want to give those parents the ability to say, look, I want to move my kid. When it comes to vouchers, we've had pieces of legislation that take a kid with disabilities, say he can go to a different school, a school that is better able to provide an education for him, and the money follows it. The Democrats voted against it. And it went from public school to public school. It only affected a very small portion. You need to look at education the same way we look at many problems. There are different ways to solve a problem. Charter schools is a way to do that. Virtual online schooling. Every university has it. Elementary schools. Why not be able to provide it for kids in Southwest if they're close to the BDU or close to some of the other areas where they do have broadband? To be able so they don't have to spend 3 hours on a bus. If we want to educate our kids, it's got to be a full-scale system.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Next question, please. And the question's going to start with Ms. Galante.
Will you support ratification of the ERA by Virginia?
Yes.
Mr. Weber?
Well, currently the ERA is not before the body. Justice Ginsburg said herself that it is not properly before the body. It's not properly before Congress. It needs to start over. And what I would like to see is if it starts over, that it is worded very similarly to other things where we do not lose some of the safeguards that we have from small business, women, SWAM businesses, private schools for women, etc. I mean, we want to be able to maintain that. And if you read the language conservatively, those protections aren't there. And I'd like to see that because we've striven to make sure that they're there.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Next question, starting with Mr. Weber.
Okay, this is an audience question. Invasive plant species are taking over. What should or could Virginia do to help stop their continued spread? Mr. Webert, I believe you're first.
Oh, man. I don't know. Stink bugs are terrible. Emerald ash borer. If you want to talk about disease, the American chestnut is a perfect example. We need to do more research on things. So, for instance, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we have one of the greatest tree nurseries. We need to do similarly what we did to mussels in the Chesapeake Bay, where disease was hitting mussels, and rather than import, foreign mussels or foreign entities to take on these things, we bred our own, and we need to continue to work on that. And then the other thing is, before new species are introduced, like VDOT with the tree of heaven, we need to really take a look at those things because, quite frankly, you can't get rid of that. So it doesn't matter how many times you cut up, they keep appearing. So we need to do more research on that before, and then we also need to make sure that when we've invested heavily in our port, and as we import commodities and goods from foreign nations, we need to make sure that with those new investments, we've done a good job of quarantining, et cetera, to make sure that some of those foreign things do not come into the Commonwealth.
Ms. Galante?
Stilt grass is actually a topic that comes up a lot when I ask people what they're concerned about, especially this summer. So I do think invasive species are a serious issue and far beyond stilt grass. And I think that good funding for land-grant universities to continue to study invasive species and other environmental questions that we have that are really facing the Commonwealth is key. And we have a great land-grant university system in this state. I'll even say it as a UVA grad, Virginia Tech does a very good job at this. So I'd love to support research for that. And I think Lyme disease is another piece that affects us particularly in this category that would be great as well. Biosecurity is an important issue. And we are a very open state. We also have great trading partners. We need to make sure that we take the security measures that are the other side of openness, though. And that's why I would support ways that we look at what we're importing, making sure that that fits with the profile and knowledge of what our own indigenous species are, and really take the issue seriously.
Thank you, Ms. Galante. Next question, start with Ms. Galante.
How would you like to see the General Assembly handle the redistricting issue?
I think the last thing politicians should be doing is drawing districts for themselves. And that's why I support independent redistricting. In this district alone, the 18th district, you look at Front Royal and it's cracked between 3 delegates. In effect, that means there's very little representation by a single delegate for that town. And I think that the way that we keep gerrymandering out of Virginia after the next census, after the 2020 census, is by passing the independent commission bill again this year in the General Assembly. And that's something I will do as a legislator.
Thank you, Ms. Galante. Mr. Webert.
Well, that's interesting. I voted for the resolution that created the independent redistricting and the way it's set up. So the way you do that is to do it again. But you got to remember, your legislators also know the district. They know the people. Warren County has 3 very good delegates. That's a coalition of folks that can get together and try and get things done for Warren County. It's the same in other counties as well. So keep that in mind when things move forward. You don't want to create an oligarchy, but this independent gives the legislative body a say, it gives the independent body a say, and it gives the judiciary body a say. So I voted for it this last session, and we'll vote for it again.
Panel, I think we're coming up to where we might have time for one more question before we go to closing remarks.
Audience question. What is your position on raising the minimum wage in Virginia?
Mr. Webert?
I'm against it.
Ms. Galante?
We have the lowest.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Webert, did you
No,
have
go
something
ahead.
to say?
Look, I farm for a living. I pay my guys very, very well. Many other agricultural producers across rural Virginia do. The reason is because good hard labor that will work on a Sunday, work on the 4th of July, you got to pay them well. Now, if you're going to raise the minimum wage so that somebody else is doing a job that doesn't require nearly as hard labor or require nearly the expertise to run a combine, etc., more, then I've got to raise mine more. And all the goods become more and more expensive. This hurts people in general. It hurts the poor. They are experiencing these things in Seattle, etc. So no, I will not vote for it because the marketplace is doing it itself. My guys make a very good living, and they work hard because I treat them well.
Thank you, Mr. Webert. Ms. Galante?
It sounds like Mr. Webert's employees are making far more than the minimum wage in Virginia, which is $7.25. You can't afford to rent a 1-bedroom apartment in this district if you're working more than 40 hours a week at minimum wage. We need to do something about this. We need to make sure it makes sense and it's prevailing wage that we work in this district, but $7.25 is just too low. We also need to make sure that Virginia gets the balance right here. It is an important accomplishment that under our governor, we are back to being the #1 state for doing business. But when you look into the factors of how that methodology, it's CNBC, how that methodology is formed, the first piece that they look at, that critical economic measure, is our workforce, our economy, our infrastructure, and our education system, right? If we want to get serious about being good for business, we should also look at these same factors that we are good at, education and our workforce, and make sure we are using those pluses in this Commonwealth to make sure we're good for working families. We rank dead last in the country when it comes to workers. We can do better than that. We need to think seriously about how we make sure we are not just the #1 state for business, but we're the #1 state for working families as well.
Thank you, Mr. Galante. All right, we're going to now move on to closing remarks, and we're going to start with Mr. Webert. You'll have 2 minutes, please, Mr. Webert.
All right. Well, been fun. First of all, thank you everyone for having me here tonight. It's a pleasure, it's an honor. We discuss some interesting topics. Virginia is the #1 state to do business. CNBC and Forbes both rank the legislation that I carried that put us there. The General Assembly and the Republican-led General Assembly funded our universities, funded our schools, provided that we have a good place to work. And not only that, but you don't have to join a union to have a job. I've lived in Fauquier County for nearly 2 decades. I realize how special our community is. This is the main reason why it's such an honor for me to represent you in the House of Delegates. The choice is clear. On one hand, you have a candidate who has a record of bipartisan accomplishment. That would be me. That's how you pass legislation that goes to the House and the Senate and is signed by the governor unanimously. That is how you pass largest regulatory reform in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia. That's how you pass legislation that will revitalize the horse industry. That's how you pass the conservation legislation that I passed. Or on the other, one who not only will vote and hold with liberal Ralph Northam, but will also take away a lot of local authority. And you heard it here. The solution is in Richmond. The solution is in Richmond, not your local elected representatives. On the one hand, you have a candidate who understands agriculture, and that rural is a way of life, not a fancy campaign slogan. I have a proven record of straight talk, hard work, and proven results. From broadband and school funding to protecting individual liberties and cutting red tape. I have a proven record of bipartisan accomplishment. This is why come November, I ask you for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webert. Ms. Galante? Okay.
I'm glad my opponent likes my campaign slogan. Look, I say the future is rural because we have an opportunity right now. We don't just have to look at Arlington and Fairfax County and the Northern Virginia counties and say, that's who's funding the state. It's not true. We have people who are here, who work so hard, who put in the thought that is needed to innovate, whether that's in agriculture or running their small business. We have a real opportunity at the state level in Richmond, not just locally, not just federally, to drive objectives that will matter to us here. That means good jobs that pay well, that don't just require a college degree. That means a community with healthcare costs that are affordable and prescription drug prices that you can buy. That means education systems that can give you a top education without having to have 40 children in a classroom. This means having the internet, the ability to sell your goods online, the ability to study online, the ability to get your homework done, the ability to access information. These are basics, right? But this is the opportunity we have. You can put me, someone who will look at common sense, practical solutions, an analyst at heart who looks into the detail, who will form coalitions with the rest of the state, who doesn't think in party terms, but in local terms, in effectiveness. And I will be your advocate. I have spent months listening. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. That ratio is important. And that's how I use them. This is about focusing locally, not neglecting the issues in front of us and pushing them to other parts of the government. This is about someone who will think here in what our future is like and not be focused on just voting along with their party. I think we have a huge opportunity on November 5th. I am excited to lead that, and I will be your advocate. Thank you.